I'd had these extraordinary years running the task force for Gordon Brown, and it was an amazing privilege, an amazing moment. But task forces finish. So, okay, what do I want to do? And I'd been a corporate advisor for years, and I loved to do it. But I'd really learnt through the government role, there is a chasm between policymaking and government and businesses. The destruction of value there is just awful. I was a bit shocked, actually, about the fact that I thought, wow, you want growth in a country, we want prosperity in a country. Where's it going to come from? It's going to come from business. It's not a value, just a fact.
But what I wonder is it big business has a problem? Is it departmentalized, detached from their people?
It's a new demand. Almost everybody at the top of business today is really good at delivering financial value. That's how they got there. And they do it really well. But they haven't thought about social value. There's a lot of businesses now where people can be working 40 hours a week and they can't pay for their food at the end of the week. Well, that's a business model that's not human.
Why should CEOs act like protesters, and what happens when they do? In this gripping episode, Lucy, senior advisor at Brunswick and co-author of The Activist Leader, takes us behind the curtain of big business, where she helps FTSE giants and global CEOs wrestle with problems no one trained them for. Things like carbon emissions, poverty wages, plastic waste, and toxic supply chains. She begins with a revelation. Governments and big business don't trust each other. They actually even hate each other. And Lucy's job is to get them to talk, not just about policies or profits, but about how to fix the systems both sides depend on. Lucy shares hard, fascinating stories like how Maersk built the world's first green container ships to break a decade-long industry deadlock, how Walmart educated 2,000 suppliers on bee health and soil regeneration, and how Intel transformed blood minerals into a supply chain badge of honor. Lucy calls this pivot learning out loud. This is what business sounds like when it grows a backbone. Check it out. Hello and welcome to Business Without Bullshit. I am Andy Ory, and today we are joined by the lovely Lucy Parker. Lucy is a senior advisor at Brunswick Group and co-author of The Activist Leader. A pioneer in helping major companies navigate their role in society, Lucy co-founded Brunswick's sustainable business practice, advising global leadership teams on some of the most pressing environmental and social challenges of our time. Lucy began her career making BBC documentaries before moving into strategic corporate communications and even chaired the Prime Minister's task force on talent and enterprise. Lucy, a warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
We start with something easy. We're going to start with a bit of fun, Lucy, which is just to get to know you a bit better. I'm going to ask you some very simple questions. You should know the answers to them. Answer as quickly as you can. What was your first job, Lucy?
Running workshops for children in parks in South London during their summer holidays.
Nice.
And I'm pretty much still doing something not far from that today,
Really?
to be frank. Yeah.
What a lovely thing. What if the sun's out? What's your worst job?
I have a very clear memory of my worst job, but I do have to say that it actually wasn't the job that was the problem. It was
the
probably
boss.
me. No, it was me. I was a junior researcher on a BBC programme that actually, one of those news roundup programmes after the proper news. And we used to have to get there at 7 a.m, not a problem. And I was a junior with my coffee and no notebook. And they would go around the table discussing what would be on the air in maybe 12 hours' time. And all the grown-ups at the table would say, I think we should cover Middle East, or we should cover stress in the National Health Service. And that's like decades ago, right? And it's like, what would you cover today? Middle East and National Health Service. So that's really not hard. But if you're me and you're very junior, you're sitting on the edge, and they would say, can you look up, we found a roller skating nun in Yorkshire. Can you bring them in? Or the one I really remember was there was a guy who'd worked out how to play the national anthem on his instruments from the garden, garden implements. And I just hated it, and I was rubbish at it. And I was pulled up in front of the sort of Queen Bee boss, who was the presenter. Who wrote this script? Who wrote this intro script? Me, man. Well, it's not funny. And I'll go, well, I'm not very funny. And after a bit, they said, we don't think you're particularly good at this and you don't like it, do you know? I went, no. And then they moved me into other things I did like, but it was the worst.
Do you think you take life quite seriously then underneath
Yeah,
it?
very.
You do?
I do. That is the problem. But I definitely know that it was a kind of lesson wasn't the job. It was the worst job for me at the worst time. But I'm a bit too serious.
Favorite subject at school?
My favorite subject at school was history, but it was because of the why. It was a sort of classic story. I had a great history teacher.
Teacher makes everything.
Everything. And there was a marvellous moment of one illustrated by. It was a marvellous moment, which has actually carried right through my career, which is I did history A-level, and we all came in for history class, and we were like ready to go and eager. And she came in and said, I'd like you to read this book this week. And it was called The Waning of the Middle Ages. And it was by a Dutchman called Huizinga. And it was about exactly what it sounded like, the waning of the Middle Ages. And we came in ready to talk about it the next week. And she said, we're not going to talk about it. I'd like you to go away and read this book, which was called The Age of Ambition by De Boulay, a Frenchman. It was exactly the same period of time in exactly the same part of the world. And somebody was writing the waning of the Middle Ages, and somebody else was writing the rise of the Renaissance. I mean, wow. And as a young girl, listening, and what is history all about, it was the most brilliant exercise it's all going on at the same time. It's multiple layers. And what case do you want to make? They're both right, but it's all going on. And how do you look at all of that and make the case you want to make? It was such a sensationally good piece of teaching about, this is actually about how you look at things and how you learn and how you make a case. And it was a history lesson. But I was very lucky to have it.
That's a great answer. What's your special skill, Lucy?
I've had to ask people this, right? So talking about taking it seriously, what I do know how to do is to listen to somebody to elicit what they mean. So if you like, it's a kind of cut to the chase thing, or put it another way, cut the bullshit. What do you actually want to say? What is the thing you're trying to get across? And to help people explain why they want you to understand this, why it matters, and make their best case for what they believe you should understand. I make my living as an advisor now. I was a documentary maker when I began. And a lot of it is just listen and make the case. What am I hearing? And of course, everybody's up right close against their own lives. They can see all the details. I sometimes look at it like stars in the sky. It's all the details. But so what's the constellation we're going to paint? We need that, and that. That makes a picture. And out of that, you can help me understand something that matters to you. And that's sort of what I do most of the day, every day.
Nice. It's a nice skill. It means you like listening too. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Ballerina. Didn't last very long, but I did want to be a ballerina.
My little daughter wants to be a ballerina.
Does she? I know the feeling.
She's only 4.
I know, but you do. And it's the pink tights, and it's something, isn't it? I wanted to be a ballerina, but it wasn't going to last as a concept. She
accidentally found this magazine of this little magazine that's come in a newspaper or something of wedding dresses. And so she's like, Daddy, I want this one, And I mean, I've had to make a film of it because I'm just like, it's heartbreaking, What did your parents want you to be?
There was no expectation from my parents about what I would do or any kind of career path or anything. I think what there was really, really clear message was, what are you going to do that's going to be helpful? I mean, the expectation was be useful, and it's going to be something that you'll have to work hard at and get better at, but be useful.
Yeah, right. Do you ever do karaoke, Lucy?
Well, no. My confession is I have never done a karaoke, and I hope I don't do karaoke. I think maybe it's my special skill. I've got to this point in my life and I've never done karaoke. No, I don't.
If you had to sing a song, could you pick a song?
Yes, I would pick a song, actually. Try a Little Tenderness is probably one of my favourite songs of all time.
Oh, which version? Who do you like? What's it? It's originally by... don't know.
Otis
It's originally
Redding,
by Otis Redding.
And I think that song just moves me hugely. It's not the music I've got a problem to. It's me being in karaoke that I'm...
Yeah, great choice. We always ask this, office dogs, business or bullshit?
Business.
Very good. And what's your vice, Lucy?
Tony Chocolonely.
Oh, really? Do you like the Tony Chocolonely?
Well, I love chocolate, and I definitely feel to myself, I wish I didn't like chocolate so much.
So that's the end of the quickfire round. That's just to get to know you a little better. So give us an overview of what are you doing currently?
Well, I lead the team in Brunswick that is about the social value of business. And what do I think I mean by that? big businesses are a very big engine in society. They really matter in society. And the last decades, the big businesses have got very, very big. And these days, a lot of the big societal questions in the world are also big business questions. And there is always this question, what is business in society? And the fact of the matter is, on most of the big societal challenges today, we need business engaged. And the social issues have become business issues, so business needs to engage with them. And my work and team I work with, we're working with the leaders of big businesses to go, how do you engage with these big societal questions in a constructive way, in a positive way, where you play your role at its best and it helps the business?
Do you find, just as a base point, relatively speaking, my understanding from the stats is that the UK has way more smaller businesses than big business. I mean, what's the fact? 5.5 million businesses with less than 250 people and 7,000 or 8,000. So big, but you're talking big. So you're talking the 8,000.
Yeah, I'm talking some of the biggest businesses in the world and the biggest businesses in the country.
Do they have to be headquartered here, or is it?
No, I work all over the world. Work with businesses in America and Singapore and Denmark.
Brunswick's a place. What is the Brunswick? Tell me what the history, or what is Brunswick?
Brunswick is an advisory firm that works with big businesses.
Yeah.
And it works particularly with, I think of it as, how do you show up in the world? And it began with, how do big businesses engage with the financial community? Investors, financial media, analysts, the ecosystem around the capital markets. And that was 30, 40 years ago. And over time, it's grown and expanded. It started around one table in London, and it's now 27 offices around the world.
Wow.
And it's doing businesses now, not only with the capital markets, but also the big public affairs centers of the world. So whether that's London or Brussels or DC or Berlin or Beijing, where are you working with policymakers? And then the part of the business I founded and lead is, and what about civil society? What about the big social stakeholders? Where do you work with them? And something maybe you would relate to is when I say it began around a table, you asked what's the history. My brother founded it.
Really, the Brunswick Group, yeah.
And it was my mum's kitchen table.
Really?
and he and I worked together really, really well. We've worked together very well since day one. But
is he still in the business?
Yeah, he's the chair of the business, and we work very, very closely together. And after I finished the role in government, when I had a chance to do that, I stepped out. And you very seldom get a moment in your life where you can go, I could turn this way or that way. Got quite a bit of experience under your belt.
Man trapped in a family business. Hasn't happened yet, but yeah, I look forward to it.
But there was just that moment.
Wow.
I'd had these extraordinary years running the task force for Gordon Brown, and it was an amazing privilege, an amazing moment. But task forces finish. So, okay, what do I want to do? And I'd been a corporate advisor for years, and I loved to do it. But I'd really learnt through the government role, there is a chasm between policymaking and government and businesses. And I think the destruction of value there is just awful. And, well, I think I thought that kind of you get them in the room and they talk to each other.
Big businesses and
big policymakers and
right, get them together. So you're really talking civil servants in Britain. Let's talk a British system. It would be top civil servants talking to, not politicians, civil servants. Or
civil servants, policymakers. Yeah.
I'm so ignorant. I don't know what isn't the MP the policymaker and then the civil servant delivers it? No.
Nah, it's a complicated because I don't think I knew enough about it when I went into it, but it's a very good question. But the civil service is sort of building policy, and the politicians come in and do their stuff for a bit, and the policy making goes on. But I think I know that there's always a talk about what's between government and business, what's between government and business. It's an ongoing question. And I think because I'd been brought up in a world of business, I'd worked for decades as a business advisor, I sort of thought, well, surely, that's a thing I can help do, is bring people together. And I thought, wow, this isn't a little bit of interpreting. This is different tribes, different value systems with
oil and water.
With oil and water, built-in hostility. And I was a bit shocked, actually, about the fact that I thought, wow, if you want, you want growth in a country, we want prosperity in a country, where's it going to come from? It's going to come from business. It's not a value, just a fact. It's going to generate the wealth, and it'll come from an ecosystem of the big businesses working with the little businesses and the supply chains.
Yeah.
And politicians seem to know that in their minds, but they don't engage with business. They try and sort of harness it, trap it, control it, and they can't understand the engine that it is. Meanwhile, businesses spend their time saying policymakers ought to get off our back and let us do it. I mean, both of those things are nonsense. And in fact, they do work together all the time, but there's a kind of legend that they don't work. Anyway, I got out of the task force because that role finished, and I thought, I wonder which way to go. And I was genuinely interested in what is this chasm and how could business and government, business and civil society work better. And as I got closer to it, I thought, actually, one of the biggest questions is, people don't really understand the role of business in society. What is it actually doing? I was trained as a teacher a very long time ago, and I was working a lot with the Department of Education when I was in government. And I did a huge amount in schools on this question. And I really learned every single teacher I came across assumed that business was bad. And they brought their kids up in their classrooms to think that business was bad. And I was like, wow, this is a shame. This is a missed trick. And so I started to work in that space. But then actually what you realize is, you think of the big questions in the world. You think of inequality, you think of climate, you think of the nature crisis, you think of the quality of the food we eat. These are all things that are actually on the agenda in business. And it was going rapidly from the edge to the center. And now it's just, the most riveting question. And when I began it with John, with whom I wrote the book, we'd chip up in a business.
This is not your brother. This is
no, different. Yeah. A collaborator and creative partner I really love working with. We would show up in a business and we'd talk about these ideas. And some business, very interesting idea. I think there's somebody down the corridor who might be interested in this, over there. And there was sort of something, maybe the chairman's wife was interested in something, charity or something. I'm sending it up, but not very much, And we were going, sorry, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about actually, what do you actually do? And is it working for society at large? So take 2 or 3 very easy questions. We're all exercised about climate change. Well, it does actually come from the way we produce goods and services and the way we use energy. All of that is business. So what is your role if you're leading a business today? What is your role in that? We're all very anxious about the quality of the food we eat. Somebody's producing that food. What is your role in that? These questions are now business questions. You have business leaders standing up quarterly at results saying what a successful business they are. And they're running maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And some of them are working 40-hour weeks and more, and they can't pay for their food at the end of the week. That's not okay. So how you run a business is the question. And so we got interested, and we've now done that virtually 15 years together. And the reason we wrote Activist Leader is there was a high point a few years ago when you realized there were no big businesses not thinking about this thing. Some have thought about it deeply, have done really fascinating things. And you could feel business leaders going, what is this thing? I can see I need to engage with it. I need to talk about it. But I don't know how to do it. And in our view, it's a new demand. Almost everybody at the top of business today is really good at delivering financial value. That's how they got there. And they do it really well. But they haven't thought about social value. And they can see the pressure coming at them to have a way of engaging with that, and they didn't know how. And if you've been doing it for a decade plus like we had, actually, you look at the people who do it well, it's a really clear pattern. The picture of how to do it well is evident when you see it happen again and again and again. And so given that literally every business leader I could see was asking the question how, we wanted to distill what we know so far about how. And that's what we were thinking about. Does that make sense?
I love what you're saying. I'm just sort of, I've got, lots of thoughts in response. First of all, out of interest, do you think, so this business is bad? Partly we sit here in this podcast because that is the experience that I get having worked in this job with entrepreneurs most of my life. And meanwhile, my friends tend to all be in charities or musicians or there'd be this sort of, just this tone of like, oh, businesses, the Thames Water thing happens. Oh, there's evil people and I'd be like, I'd always end up sort of, and I'd almost get, slammed myself, but I'd be like, hey, it's not like that. But what I wonder is it big business has a problem? Is it departmentalized, detached from their people? Like small businesses, they care about that. I mean, that's Susan and John, and I know their
completely.
kids, and and I'm like, I'd be devastated, So that's where I come, because I deal with SMEs that they care far more about their people and what they're trying to do. Often they're just, I get really upset when people, all business care about is shareholder value. I'm like, I couldn't disagree more. Most people I know don't even know who their shareholders are, But is it big business becomes detached, departmentalized? And I've got, you're talking about companies with thousands of employees, and therefore I am run by the investors and the shareholders, and that's if I'm listed delivering results so that market cap doesn't go down, and it's sort of, and then that interacts with the policymakers see that only, and they think,
and they see profits. Profits are bad things.
Well, there is a relationship with money is very funny in this
very
country.
Complicated. Yeah. So I agree. I think you're wonderfully. You're putting the whole damn question on the table. So if one just took two or three ideas in what you've said, I completely agree. Small businesses or SMEs, whatever the language for them, it's the heartbeat of business, and they're the human face of business, and it's almost impossible not to have an empathy for that. And I think a lot of people who succeed in very big businesses, they care about shareholder value. By the way, they're good at doing it, just like SMEs or entrepreneurs are good at making the money that keeps the business growing. But I don't know many who are only motivated by the money.
Yes.
They're actually motivated by the thing they're making and the huge skill and capability of making it. And yes, they expect it to throw off a lot of money, and the money is in the capital market, so it's a very complicated thing. And I think scale is a lot of what we're talking about here. The big businesses have got exponentially larger in the last few decades.
Is that right? The big have got bigger.
The big businesses have got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's a lot of the problem. There's maybe half a dozen businesses, if that basically rule the global food system. So SMEs are all over the place feeding into these big businesses. So they're like the sort of big beasts in the jungle in a way. Let me give you a couple of examples, and then maybe it comes alive a little bit. Let's take a couple of businesses where their names are very clear, just helps to envisage it. I used to work a lot with Rolls-Royce many years ago. You can't help
the engines or the cars,
the railway engines. No.
Yeah.
And, I had amazing privilege being able to see how they were built and so on. And you see the tens of thousands of people that build an airplane. I mean, the exquisiteness and the engineering skill and the passion behind it and the imagination and the innovation and the scale of building one. That's no mean feat. People often talk about big businesses as a kind of concentration of skills and capabilities. So they're motivated by that. There are a lot of people at the top who have to be able to do that in a way that throws off profits, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But the thing they think they're doing is making this extraordinary thing a jet engine.
Yeah.
And when you see what it takes to do it, you can't help but go, wow, that's astonishing. Yeah. And then you go and meet somebody who's actually making dresses, and you see the dresses being made, and you see the thread coming through, and you go, wow. I mean, these are huge, fascinating machines, and they employ tens of thousands of people, and they throw off the taxes that funds every other thing. And then you get to this really fascinating and interesting thing about SMEs. With Rolls-Royce, I remember mapping this all out. Their ecosystem, 2,500 small businesses all over the place. By the way, brilliantly expert engineering businesses, some of them in Chile, some of them in Australia, many of them in the Midlands and the UK. And all of those little businesses are going, we've got fantastically good at making this widget. And if we can sell it to Rolls-Royce, we can send it anywhere in the world. Now, why am I saying all that? Because a lot of people don't see businesses as this sort of engine.
This organism almost.
This organism of skill and resources and concentration all coming out towards an end. Now, if it's somebody, an SME, a small business, I don't know, making dresses in the Midlands somewhere, we go, marvellous. And they sold more dresses. How fantastic. And they got a bit more money and they sold more dresses. We're perfectly happy that that's the profit motive and it's got a human face. This is like hundreds of thousands of times bigger and it loses its human face. But the engine it is in society is exactly the same. But the rough edges of what I call social value, or where businesses show up in society, a big piece of that is the how of the profits. So I mentioned, there's a lot of businesses now where people can be working 40 hours a week and they can't pay for their food at the end of the week. Well, that's a business model that's not human. And yet the capital markets perpetuates it. Or you take food. We're all worried about the quality of our food. We have cheap food in supermarkets, very good, and they've worked very hard to give us cheap food. We all know that is it the chemicals in the food? Is it the antibiotics in the food for the chickens? Is it the way they look after the chickens, which they don't do? They're in cages and it's really grim. And if people saw it, we'd all feel a bit worse. Is it that there's more? How do you make your profits? That's where the rub always is. And so that's the question. How do you look at the consequences of how you make your profits?
If you take the edgier bit of that, is that there are people working 40 hours a week that can't, afford their food. I mean, my understanding of it, thanks to a friend of the show, Andrew Craig, is that because we started printing money, like the real problem that's going on that I think gets, overlooked is because we started printing money, quantitative easing, effectively, and that's been going on, since like 1970 or the 60s. America sort of decoupled from the gold exchange or something, and then they started doing it. Just means salaries are becoming less valuable to stuff, and it's been going on for ages. That's why a house is so much more expensive, and that gets a bit lost. I think it's really interesting then looking at through the prism of sort of big business to say, you've got people who aren't earning enough, because that was going to continue to get worse as long as we print money, is my understanding of it, because we're basically devaluing the country the whole time. And most countries are doing this. But it's interesting to say, because a big business would say, well, I can't afford to pay that role anymore. I could move that role to a country where maybe that money could be valuable enough, or, So how much... Again, back to your policy thing, it's like, how much is it on the business shoulders? Because it's almost businesses need to say to the government, stop printing money. But then they would say, well, we can't stop printing money because we've got all these gilts and bonds that we've issued. Because I'm only starting to get my head around this, that we can't afford to pay people. So when you're sovereign and you have your own currency, you raise money through tax and you raise money through bonds. And then you have to pay 5% a year on these bonds. We don't have enough money in the country. So if you go around in a big circle, you basically need a more successful economy, I think. But I mean, I'm asking there is a vague question in there, which is sort of, is it, and also, do you feel that you should say to a business, you have to work out how to pay that person more? Or is it okay they then offshore it because they're like, well, we can't?
Marvelous question. Because actually, going back to the point I was making about the how you make profits, and also how do you start to tackle these issues. I don't pretend to get my head around the economic argument that you've just been extrapolating. We both follow it and that sort of thing. But there's something almost more straightforward and simple to do with regulation. So again, and I've heard you talk about, there's a sort of standoff. Is regulation bad or is regulation good? Good and bad is unuseful words.
Yeah.
Really unuseful words.
Fair point.
But one of the things I'm seeing now, which is really of the moment, and I think is super exciting and has a sort of creative possibility ahead of it, is that this sounds like I'm not answering your question, but I'm trying to. A few years ago, take something like carbon emissions, which are a huge, huge thing in the world, but also in business. You used to hear businesses sort of say, well, I don't know why people are coming to us. Business leaders would literally look you in the eye and go, I don't know why they're coming to us with this sort of question. Government needs to sort this, meaning you set the policy and we'll do what we're told, but please don't set the policy. So, okay, it was a sort of standoff with, well, we're doing what we're doing. We're making business. They don't really understand us. They should make the policy. Now, say 5-6 years later than that, a different thing happening altogether. The leaders, in my view, what I would call activist leaders in business, are actually turning to governments and saying, you need to regulate this. And what you've seen in that 5 or 6 years is that the leading businesses are going, we saw the problem like you saw the problem of carbon emissions, however you want to put it, climate change. And we set off to try, and we're really working at it. And you see really fascinating and inspiring and interesting things going on in business. Costs money. It's really hard to do. Nobody on the planet's ever done anything like this before, so you're having to make it up and innovate towards it as you go. And the leading business is quite taking a hit. And they're going, government, if you were serious, if you're really saying your national policy is serious about this, you can't expect us as a business to take this on solo. We've been proving how important it is. We've been proving what's possible. You've got to create the level playing field of regulation that makes everybody do it. Or we have to step back because we can't do it without you. You said you were serious. Get serious. Make it happen for the whole industry.
But it's all global now, so there's never a level playing field.
That's the problem.
Rolls-Royce is not a British company. I mean, it's a multinational, I'm sure.
100%. 100%. So that's the problem. And arguably, if you had somebody, I often say to myself, there's only one thing worse than the fact that we don't have anybody running the world, is just imagine we had somebody running the world.
Yeah.
So what that actually means is everything's kind of bumping up to each other all at the same time. And you get one country that leads in regulation for a while, and then others
affects its economy and pushing people around.
And then, so everybody's playing their part. And what I mean by, I think there's something quite interesting and inspiring going on in the leading businesses in the last few years is, I call it leadership model. What you actually see is businesses going, okay, what can we do? What can we do with the ecosystem around this issue? And how do we advocate, which often means advocating towards government, you regulate so we can all do it. So let me give you an example, just because I think it's very hard to talk about these things in abstract.
Yeah, examples are great.
I don't know if you've come across a big shipping company called Maersk.
Yeah, of course, with all the shipping containers.
Yeah. I mean, what they've done on climate is, amazing.
Really? They're Dutch, I presume, aren't they?
They're Scandinavian, actually.
Of course they are. Who's the blooming Scandinavians doing all the good stuff?
Yeah, I know. Well, so there they are, big shipping company. We know, the world knows, that the carbon emissions from shipping...
Terrible. Very, very low per mile, per kilo or something.
Pretty
but
grim.
Terrible
pretty
otherwise,
grim, right?
Burning black oil.
Yeah, it's terrible,
sort of
right?
Stuff.
So wind the clock back a few years. Maersk thought, hang on a sec, the ships we put on the ocean are there for 30 years. So here we are in, say, 2020. The ships we commission today are going to be on the ocean in 2050. So if the world is trying to arrive at net zero in 2050, we put ships on the ocean today that are part of the carbon problem. We've done nothing, right? And the industry was at an absolute standoff. So what you were seeing was that the ships are all driven on fossil fuels. And they go, well, we have no alternative because there are no alternative fuels. The supply chain was going, well, we can't make any fuels because there's no ships that run on anything except fossil fuels. So there's a complete standoff. And it had been standoff for about a decade and nothing happening. And Maersk went, well, okay, we got to change this. So they commissioned the first ever ships to be run on something other than fossil fuels, green methanol as it happened. Now, they invested in 8 ships.
What are they running?
Green methanol.
Green methanol.
So they commissioned 8 ships. Not huge in context of their fleet, but it had never been done before. They got them on the ocean in a very short period of time. And as soon as they started to see the 8 were working, they started making it 13. And they also, simultaneously, had just made the largest shipping shipping fleet ever with the least carbon emissions by the way they'd engineered the ships, right? So they put these ships on the ocean. But in order to do that, they had to invest in the supply chain of green methanol. So they boosted the supply chain. In other words, they did it in the business. They worked with the ecosystem around the business. And then they were advocating into the world's regulation system for carbon pricing that would drive this through the whole industry. You wind that 5 years on, nobody in the industry had done that. People are now beginning to experiment with these ships. The industry is now starting to call for a carbon price and so forth. And Maersk has written a 5-year strategy for Europe that goes, if you're serious about taking the carbon emissions out of ships, this is how you do it. We've gone as far as we can go without policy. But it's a really brilliant example of in the business, beyond the business, and through advocacy.
Is this an advantage of these companies becoming so big now and so global that they are the global governments? You know, I mean, you can say this about the tech giants and the power they have. Maybe if they're not, you know, if you alluded to this, and I think it's such an important point. If we don't think in good and bad, and we accept that everything is nuanced and everything is grey and no one's perfect in either direction, these businesses could be, you know, 80% trying to do the right thing, you know, and they have the scale and the power and the money now to not, like, tax is a big, tax is my subject. It's a big problem. A lot of people get very worked up about it, particularly in this country. And everyone loves tax till it applies to them. But, it's not a national game. And that's my frustration as an international tax advisor. They're like, yeah, more tax here. It's like, they will leave. And, anyway, it's like.
Exactly.
But once you got global multinational companies, that example, I mean, they're on the sea, so that's sort of international law, but they could look at all sides of it and say, let's do the right thing.
Yeah.
We've got the money, we've got the power. And then they, as a result of there being less of them and they're more powerful, then they can turn to government. I mean, this is like a real one of those moments, because this is also what scares the crap out of people, that they're like, the evil companies are taking over the world, and they're more powerful than governments and they don't care about anyone. So it's like, well, again, it's not new. It's nuanced. It's just not as simple as that.
It's nuanced and it's forward facing. I mean, to me, the question is, okay, so what do we do now? I mean, we're all guilty. We're all, with the lights are on. We had the hot shower. We're going on holiday. Everybody's built into a fossil fuel system that doesn't carry on. We're wearing the clothes that are made of these things. So we're all part of the problem. The big companies are a big part of the problem. But they're also probably the only source of the innovation, concentrated power, scaling up of implementation.
By the way, we're not going to run out of oil anytime soon.
Exactly.
That keeps disappearing. Peak oil, forget about it.
Yeah. So it's actually about the invention of the alternative. Well, that's business invention. The NGOs can hang from the rafters and keep it on the front pages of the newspaper every so often if they get a chance. The academics can analyze it and point at it. The governments can create policy that frames the incentives. But it's the companies that have to invent the technologies. It's the companies that have to scale and deploy.
And most governments.
Exactly.
I mean, your example's great. They're thinking 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And companies do tend to try and, well, it depends on your business, but farmers think longer, but you have to think 10, 20 years.
I'll tell you, farming is another one. I mean, to tell you this story, and let me just attach a name to it, just because it's so obviously a kind of red in tooth and claw type capitalist company. What Walmart's doing with farmers is nothing short of astonishing, in my view. And in the work that I do, I mean, they're not a client, so I'm not holding it out in any way like that. You just watch what they're doing, and you go, we need that, we need more of that. Now, if you look at what's happening, climate is really the front edge of the problem, but coming right up behind it is nature, put in inverted commas, nature, biodiversity collapse, soil health, all of this. I mean, it's really, really dangerous what's happening. Now, is that the fault of the companies? In part it is. It's mass scale farming is really terrifying, and it's gone as far as it can go and some. And it's also billions more people on the planet wanting higher standards of living and so on and so on. So again, it's whose fault is it? We're complicated. Don't worry whose fault it is. We got a problem today, and we've only just begun to really understand the scale of the problem. The reason why did I say Walmart's doing something astonishing is they did what I think is the beginning of starting to solve things. They got educated. Their senior management team went and got educated by people who know about biodiversity, know about the bees, know about soil health, to actually describe to them what is the problem. What is the actual challenge we're facing?
Because Walmart doesn't want to stop selling food.
Exactly. And it's a business that ends up in the soil. So they got the problem. They created the problem, but they didn't create it alone. We all created the problem. And they got the problem. Anyway, they went and got educated. And they pulled together their top 2,000 suppliers and literally brought those educators who had educated them in front of the suppliers their whole leadership team there, and they said, this is what we've learned about bees and the necessity of pollination and this kind of thing. The people there educating them in the way they'd educated the senior leadership. Okay, we need you over the next few years to change your practices, regenerative farming practices, as it's called. And by the way, they can't do that alone. So how do you work with your supply chain to incentivize them to change their practices, to help them get over the hump of the change in practice, change in equipment, change in soil and so forth that you're looking for? How do you keep the faith over the few years as they change? Now, if you're a big company like that and you push that through your supply chain, you're pushing it into thousands of companies and raising the standard. That's how the change is going to happen. That's what I mean by the implementation of change. Government can't do that. It's not, well, government's no good. It's not the job of government. So that's what I mean by, it's no doubt the big companies are part of the problem. The question is, how do we help them be part of the solution? And there are practical things to be done. And so for me, this is one of the biggest questions for our society, because we do default into but we like the SMEs, or, well, artists are lovely, and church is good. So good is out there.
I find it hard to think big sometimes. It's hard to understand these massive organisms.
Yes, exactly. But they are throwing off profits. And the question is, how do they make their profits? And how can we help them understand the levers they can pull? Then you can actually put a different light on it too. Really, in many ways, this is about externalities. So the thing, when I was saying, we used to get the question of, would you like to go down the corridor and see if there's somebody who's looking at doing good? For me, a real sort of enemy.
So imagine that too.
It's so grim. And I laughingly but genuinely say to clients, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about good and bad. That's not the question. So companies think, well, you're asking us to do good. And that's not the question. The question is, if you're a very big company, I can think of a very big company I work with, which has a very big fast food franchise. Right? The people running it, right? What do you think they've been doing all their life? They've been making fast food for decades. And I don't know what your day looks like or my day looks like, but you get up in the morning and you're working, you're boom, 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 end of the day, sleep. Yeah. So their day is full of running something, which, by the way, is getting bigger and bigger and more efficient, and more people are eating more and more that kind of food. Different problem again. But guess what? They are also throwing out that amount of plastic.
Yeah.
Now, they never thought about that. The guys running those businesses didn't go, oh, we're throwing this plastic out. And by the way, nobody's ever asked them to think about it. And it's happened really fast. So they know about the quality of the food and keeping the team going in the restaurant and keeping the people coming in. But they've never thought plastic. And then they go to you, as they do. I thought, weren't the local government supposed to pick up the plastic? Yes, they were, but do they?
It's covered in gunk anyway.
Gunk is disgusting, exactly. So who's going to do something about it? Now, the answer is nothing in their job description through any part of their career has ever asked them to think about that. And now they have to think about it. And the problem is, one country over here has a law against it, this country over there doesn't, this country wants it to look like that country looks like this. But they've got to go, are we going to do something about this?
Yeah, and some of those problems are pretty difficult and some of them are okay.
And the plastics don't exist. The alternatives don't exist. And they've got to be invented. So who's going to do the inventing? So you're asking business leaders today to do things they've never thought about. The plastic thrown out of a successful company's operations is an externality. What that means is society has to pick up the cost.
Which is where they sort of want to change, isn't it? If you take water out of a river, you need to pay for it. If you're dumping, if X fast food chain is, God only knows, if you pick some of the big ones, how many billion tons they're chucking out a year.
Exactly.
And you see it everywhere, don't you? And it's just the sort of waste that doesn't even end up in the bin most of the time.
I know. And so their first instinct is, but I thought that local governments were going to sort that.
I mean, as someone who was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s, I remember disposableness. I mean, that was sort of what happened in the 80s. They were suddenly like, everything was suddenly single-use, disposable. Isn't it great? It was magic,
Yeah. And so you've somehow got to take for granted
You just haven't developed those.
You haven't developed it. And honestly, you go
And
back.
that's what you're trying to help people do. Develop that mindset.
Develop the mindset and the institutions and the skills that go, what are we going to do about that? Think about it. Put it on your to-do list. And it hasn't been on anybody's business to-do list.
This is sustainability. I mean,
Yes.
ultimately.
Yes.
I mean, someone sort of said to me,
100%.
Tim Ferguson, a good man that he is, said, ESG is dead, Andy. Sustainability is alive and well. Just sort of trying to illustrate that some of the sort of reporting and sort of, let's just sort of do reports. And it's like, no, like it's a sort of deep skill, isn't it? A deep profession of sort of trying to understand.
It's a different nature of leadership. And a big hopeful thing is, one of the big jobs of a chair is to put in the next CEO or the CEO to put in the next leadership. I think it would be pretty weird today to put in leadership that didn't have this question in their heads. And that wasn't true even a decade ago.
Do you believe I forget his surname. You probably know him. He's actually a barrister, Paul something. Anyway, he came on the pod, but he advocates that all big business should have someone on their board who represents nature, basically, to help. Do you think that works? Have you seen that?
Yes, I have seen that. Not nearly enough of it happens, and I agree in principle. But if you were to take the job of, it's a great point actually, because if you were to take the job of a leader today, if I had to have one sort of flash of how grim it sometimes feels for the guys trying to, make this work, is yes, you'd better have somebody for nature, and you'd better have somebody for carbon. Have you got anybody on methane? Do you have anybody on inequality? Do you have anybody on mental health? Do you have anything on? And the guys running these businesses, they didn't have any of this on the radar screen 10 years ago. And the guy I was talking about from a fast food chain said to me, I had no idea that I had to have a view on abortion as the CEO of this company.
Well, I live in SME land, so when someone says to me, "What, we're going to have someone join our board meetings from nature," I mean, the problem is you know what kind of person they're going to be. They're not going to be a business person. They're going to be someone like, I don't agree with that, and you just spend your life going, all right,
completely
take them out the room while we get on with it, because it's not that, and then that feeds into this narrative that we're all a bunch of. But it's just like, yeah, look, if I had someone who was incredibly practical and innovative and could think through how to slowly solve these problems and didn't just sort of, I go back to your original point. I was scribbling it down on a piece of paper. Is this division we feel? So I, as a tax person, can only really comment on tax, but what I noticed is there's some academic think tanks, Resolution Foundation, Institute for Fiscal Studies. They're run by, I'm sorry if you're listening to this, as far as I can see from your website, it's all academics. No one's been in business. They're very clever people. They've come from university. We really need some of their views, but they then seem to drive the media a lot. Media report on their reports saying media is I have friends who are journalists. They're a very left-wing group. They are. I don't know whether, there's some, but again, I hate, like you, good or bad, left or right. I find the whole thing ridiculous, but certainly maybe we'll just say not the most pro-business people. They've been fed this stuff by academics. Then you're telling me, well, teachers sort of teach you business is bad. And you sort of end up, I think it's slightly eating itself. I talk to any of the entrepreneurs, people I work with. I chatted to a very successful one this morning. He was saying, well, I think like most people, mate, I've given up reading the press, ranting on every side. I'm following YouTube. I'm just here to learn. I just want to learn. So I'll use YouTube and podcasts and whatever,
Yeah, exactly. And I actually think that right to the beginning of our conversation and your first thought, these guys who run these, are they bad people? Well, there must be bad people around. There's bad people around, but most people aren't bad people. And these are
they're rare.
They're very rare
to meet someone
who's actually trying to be malicious. You know what I mean? And so they're well-meaning people and they're running these, and then people are coming up and going, what are you going to do about this? I never thought about that. And there aren't
we're
any
not comfortable
answers.
to talk about it, are we? Because we're scared to say the wrong thing. It's the abortion thing.
And also there aren't any answers. The interesting thing about this is a lot of these big societal questions, climate's the easy one to talk about, but it's not the only one. There aren't answers. We don't have an answer to what we're going to do about the victory of plastic. We haven't ever tried to change the energy system on this scale globally at all, let alone this fast. So these are huge questions going into the future. So I'm constantly meeting people who assume that businesses that made net zero commitments 5 years ago, for example, that was all just grandstanding and they were pretending to be, virtue signaling. They didn't know what they were doing. That's not my experience of it. What I think actually happened was they, like a lot of policymakers, by the way, kind of woke up and went, wow, this is serious. I mean, this is really serious in the world and in the business, and the consequences. So they were going, we agree, we've got to get over there. No idea how to get there, but we are going to publicly go, this matters enough that we're going to agree.
It's a start, isn't it?
It's a start.
I mean, we signed up to the net zero pledge, but as you say, you then say, what do you do? There's not been much good advice about what I should be doing, but you're helping me with it. It's effectively very complicated.
It's really complicated, and you've got to allow for the fact that literally there are no answers, and they've got to be invented. So you're asking a bunch of people who've never thought about it
to go to the moon.
To go to the moon,
yeah.
Which, by the way, very exciting. But now, a few years on, we're beating them up for trying and not having worked it out yet. So I live with a lot of business people who go, should we never have said that? Should we not have done it? And now I'm being accused of greenwashing for the fact that I haven't done it. And what shall I do? And actually, the answer is very much your answer, and I suspect mine too, about don't worry that you're seeing this from the left or that from the right or this from the top or that from the bottom. What's your conviction on whether this is serious? And actually, I don't know many people who've been pretending the last 5 years. They were serious then. And they've been trying. And now you go, okay, so does all this noise mean you shouldn't try? Or does it actually mean you'd better be very clear about why you thought you should? And not because you were being good or doing something other than the business, but that you saw through the lens of the business the seriousness of this and how it would impact of your business, and importantly, how the business you're running is impacting it.
Is it harder as a public company, though? You know, that they've sort of got, you know, maybe private equity or family offices. Maybe these are family offices are probably the more long term, but, you know, public markets are always like, they've got to always show improvement as opposed to sort of saying, just leave me alone for 10 years while I think about this and get some people to work on it.
I've got a slightly contrary view on that, I think. I think that I hear that a lot, and I don't disagree. But
you hear that being a public company is tougher to make the right decisions.
Tougher. We know about quarterly reporting. We know about the pressures from the capital markets to not dip profits and all that. So take that as read for a moment. I think there's quite a lot of romanticism about family companies. And if I had to look at where I see a lot of the problems lie, palm oil. Let's take palm oil. Deeply controversial, right? And it's everywhere. I mean, it's in so much of what we eat and use. And basically the business model of palm oil is chop down the forest.
Yeah, grow it in the rainforest, yeah.
Cut down what was rainforest and grow palm oil. That is the business model of the industry. And in the last few years, growing pressure that has to stop. Why? Because the world can actually see. You can literally see, eyes in the sky, satellites, the forest coming down. And people are beginning to calculate just how little of it.
Why did we started growing palm oil as a replacement for oil or something, didn't we?
The thing is, it's in so much stuff, you can't believe how much stuff it's in. It's in your soap, it's in your shampoo, it's in your biscuits, it's in your chips, and you know, it's a rather disgusting word, mouthfeel, that comes into that's usually palm oil. Anyway, it's in everything, and most people don't even know it's in everything, right? And it's hugely successful. And I've sat in Malaysia with people going, but we've built the prosperity of our country on it. And it's absolutely true. And you can see the prosperity of the country go like that, the production of palm oil go like that, and the destruction of the forests go like that. So basically, you've got an underlying problem, because it is what's created prosperity. It is driving the economy, and it is catastrophic in the context of the global climate system. So why am I saying that? That interestingly, the companies that are driving change, truthfully, in my experience, are the big listed companies. Why? Because they have to report. They have to have the data. They have to have the money. They're used to transparency.
People don't like investing in things quite quickly that become unpopular, you know. And
also they have to report, and they take the pressures from the regulations on. And where's the problem? The problem is probably not in the first tier suppliers. It may not even be in the second tier suppliers, but it is in the third tier suppliers. You can't see them. They don't have to report. Now, does that mean that little tier at the top are doing everything absolutely immaculately? No, it doesn't. But it is interesting that the drivers of the change are the big listed companies. And it's partly because a lot of them are really disciplined at what improvement looks like and improving your system, looking very clearly at the data and ramping up change. You have to put stuff into the capital markets that says what you're doing. Capital markets are beginning to wake up to where the big long-term risks are. So the dialogue is visible in a way that it isn't. It isn't perfect, and there's lots of stresses and strains. But you look 1.5, 2 layers down in the supply chains, that's where the problems start, and it's lack of visibility, and it's family companies. So I think we can get a bit romantic about the idea that
small companies, I guess, or you mean
some small, some big.
Why family?
Well, you were just making the point about family enterprises and long-term enterprises.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Do you see what I mean?
I was thinking of family. Sorry. Yeah. I was mixing up, family and office investors.
Yes. Family office investors.
I love your point. I think it's really, it shows the sort of complexity, isn't it? The ones who are really in the toughest place are the public companies. And, it's hardest for them to get away from, this sort of constant requirement to report. The regulation is so much stricter on them. They're more controlled. They're sort of, the government is able to sort of pull the levers with them, but then they have the power to affect the whole food chain. I think you make a great argument, persuade me back. It's unfortunate in this country we haven't been looking after our public companies, for various reasons.
Yes, exactly.
And they're all not doing very well as a result. And, I think they're trying to work out what to do, but I don't.
There's a very interesting example about how long it takes, actually, which you put me in mind of. There was an extraordinary campaign produced by Intel some years back, which was called In Pursuit of Conflict Minerals. I don't know if you've come across the conflict minerals story at all.
Conflict minerals would be like blood diamonds. Yeah.
So minerals that in one form or another, they basically drive wars, like drug wars almost, in a sense. And they are a source of crime and worse.
Arguably all sort of raw materials do it, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But big minerals really, really do. And there was a period when Intel was being got at by NGOs, it was a particular NGO, for do you realize that your business is driving death, basically? And of course, their first instinct was, well, no, we're not. And it came out of Democratic Republic of Congo, and the stories came out there, and it was really, really bad. And there was a marvelous story that the CEO at the time told. And he said, I first wanted to go, okay, well, let's just get out of Congo. It's ridiculous. Of course, we don't want to be doing that as a business. And it was his corporate affairs team and his teams around him said, no, that's not going to help. We should find out what's actually happening on the ground, see if we can do something about it. So they put, I think it was like 20 people or something on the ground to go and look at their smelters, because they suddenly realized they didn't actually know what was going on in their smelters, the other side of the world and deep down on the ground somewhere in Africa.
Stats on a Excel.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? It's like somewhere down there. So they put the people on the ground and they realized that they had no idea what was going on there. And sure enough, a lot of the problems are artisanal miners. People come in at night and take a piece here, and they try and make small little family businesses out of grabbing the scraps.
Wow.
So it's all going on the ground somewhere. Back to the history lesson. It's all going on somewhere. And they went, well, we've got to sharpen their act up. So they started to audit their smell. Well, of course, everybody fails the audit because they don't know what they're doing. So actually they go, well, wait a second, we're going to have to go a bit more slowly at this. So they start sort of grading, well, can you get this far? Can you get that far? Can you get this far? And over time, can you kind of go up and we can mark you better? And by the way, we won't throw you out if you fail, because then we haven't got smelters, but also you're failing and it's all a disaster. So that took years, but they set themselves a goal that the 3 most challenging minerals, that their supply chain would be conflict-free in 4 years or whatever it was. And they made it. And then their CEO came out on tech platforms and said, we're conflict-free in these areas. They started to put it onto the laptops that people were buying. Intel is conflict-free. It was a brilliant title, In Pursuit of Conflict-Free. Now, that's years, and you've got to take the heat for the fact that it's not perfect, and you're being transparent about it not being perfect, which is the point I make. You're reporting. You're telling people it's not as good as we wanted. We've got to get it to this level. So you've got to have a lot of conviction that that's worth doing. And then you tell your consumers you've done it. But you were got at by an NGO.
Yes.
And now they're doing that in other countries and with other minerals and stuff like that. But that's a long journey, and it takes a lot of conviction from a leadership
Do you
team.
think people are, I mean, on one level, telling people we're not perfect, we've got all these problems, that feels like the most natural way for me for building trust, some honesty about it.
Exactly.
And you beg for it from the politicians sometimes, can't they just say, oh, we've bucketed it all up. To be honest, absolute total mess, made of the whole thing, we'll start again. Sorry about that. But they're not. The moment they say that, they're fired. I mean, can big companies get a bit more grace than politicians? I guess maybe they got the financial clout to sort of, rather than greenwashing, saying, these are all our problems. We've got all, because some of it, like, the Bribery Act, they can't say, the Bribery Act, if you're not aware of it, very strong British law, you can't be involved in any bribery globally. Well, it's a bit hard operating in countries that effectively exist on bribes.
Completely.
So, you can't really go, okay, we're a multinational company. We recognize in these 30 countries, they're very corrupt, because you just insulted those countries.
Exactly.
And it all kicks off.
Exactly.
And it's like, I mean, I guess a good PR person can always find the language that it's like, we recognize we're not perfect and we're working on it.
I suppose the thing we advise is what we call learning out loud. In other words, you've seen the problem now. And of course, it's a natural instinct. It would be a natural instinct in an individual, but it's certainly a natural instinct in a corporate. I don't know what you mean. It's fine. And you're defending yourself.
Yeah, you react.
People do that.
Yeah.
And our advice is always, and when I'm saying there's a leadership gang, what do the leaders do at that point? They actually lean into the problem. They suddenly go, we call it literally pivoting towards the problem. You go, oh, you're right. You're right about that. That is a problem. And it's not great.
Do you see great leaders when you go to these big companies? Are you quite impressed by some of the people around the table? We're very mixed, or?
It's mixed. It's like people, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like people. I think what I feel really excited by is when you are able to help, when you see leaders who want to engage with this stuff, it's almost like they grow the whole thing, because, just getting up and I work for the money. Most of the leaders of big companies, they're not, they make a shed load of money. So we're not making
Playing
special
violence.
pleading for them. But what I mean is they got their hands on the reins of a big beast here. They want to come out the other end going, that was worth it. I did good. And if you can show a way that goes, if you did it this way, do you see the path you're on that actually is constructive? And suddenly you've got, I've seen leaders start to say, do you understand the story on nature? They didn't have that script 2 or 3 years ago.
No.
They start to understand what they could be. They start to ask the question, and then they get confident enough to go, there is a question here. And we are always saying, can you honestly say, can you look back at what you're doing and effectively look somebody in the eye and go, does that help?
I think for me too, it's if we're all too negative and dystopian about it, where you become more like, well, it's all going to go wrong anyway, so I'm just going to stockpile this money, or I'm going to just what do I care? I'll just try and protect my family and get a fortress, and I'll go to the top of a mountain. It's like, well, if that's where we end up, by the way, money's probably not going to be worth anything, which will be interesting, But the other side of it is that there needs to be, again, back to this good or bad narrative, but there needs to be a general acceptance of nuance, but also of optimism.
Yes.
Of sort of like, look, we've muddled through for thousands of years. We can work this out.
Let's work it out.
Let's work it out. People are going to die. Things are going to go wrong. My old man always says this after COVID, it really hit him, that we've become so afraid of death that, you can't accept it at all. It's sort of like, well, there's one death over here. And I know that's an extreme example, but it's like, we're talking about the planet here. We're talking about really heavy stuff. There will be natural events. Yeah, I might try and do something and it might go very wrong and someone might die. But we've got to, we've got to not get in this mindset that it's all going down the drain, because then it's a defensive mindset.
It's a defensive mindset. And also, how many people do you know, if you turn around to them and say you're really, really bad, in what way is that helping them do anything different? So it's not that
people need encouragement.
People need encouragement, but it's not. People will sometimes say to me, "Oh, so you're optimistic as opposed to pessimistic," and I'm going, "Nah." I'm looking at the situation and going, what can be done with where we are, and who has some levers to pull? And why do I do the work I do? Because when you look at the situation and the things that need doing, people in business have some levers to pull. And most people feel helpless. They kind of go, I look at this, I don't see what I am to any of these questions. But actually, if you're in a big business, you do have levers to pull. In which case, if you can start to see what those are and you run them in the core of the business, this is not about doing charity on the edge of the business. This is how you run your business.
The ingeniousness of humans too.
Yeah.
We underestimate. I mean, it's a bit like the whole, there won't be jobs with AI and robots. There's so much we need to do and give humans space to be creative. I mean, the stuff we can come up with is incredible.
It's stunning.
I mean, like your example of the Rolls-Royce jet engine. I mean, I stare at those tall buildings, or every time a jumbo jet takes off, I challenge any human, I don't know how old you are, or even if you work at Rolls-Royce, to not stand there gobsmacked. It's this 400-ton thing full of people just takes off like it's nothing,
And if you looked at some of the things that are actually happening around climate, and you read the newspapers, you'd think, honestly, well, when you read the newspapers, all disaster and everything.
Yeah.
And people tend to go, well, there's nothing happening about climate. It's absolutely not true. I mean, if you looked at the investment in renewable energy, clean energy, it's 2/3 of the money invested last year in energy was in clean energy. I remember being in the Middle East less than 10 years ago with people talking about energy and saying, well, of course, it would never be feasible to have solar. It'll never be price parity. Bang, it's price parity. So, I mean, the speed with which things are happening.
It was in the newspapers today about all the wind farms and why British power is so expensive, because we built the wind farms, we have to subsidize. But I was sitting there reading the newspaper saying, all right, well, that's the next problem. We'll work
the next
it out.
problem.
We'll store it. Yeah, it's all up in Scotland and between Ireland and England. It's miles away from London, but let's think about it.
And I think that what the reason I find it so fascinating is we're now on the brink of a generation of business leaders where this is on the to-do list. One of the reasons we haven't looked at these things before is they haven't been on the to-do list. And I remember when we wrote Activist Leader, and I asked several people, how do you make this happen? And Quincy said to me, the guy who runs Coca-Cola, he said, you've just got to put it on the list of the other strategic priorities you have, and you've got to expect your leadership teams to report to you on how they're doing it. And I know that the debate, I mean, ESG is an interesting one because it polarizes people. And the easy and quick thing to say, it's all a disaster. It's all nonsense. It's all greenwashing. It's all a disaster. Well, clearly it's not fit for purpose. End of story.
Is that where you feel? Yeah, where do you feel ESG is and where it's going? Not fit for purpose.
Well, I think there's a sort of back history to it and a future history to it. And most people are answering in the present tense. So once upon a time, people used to think, shouldn't we be thinking about these things? And they sort of bundled them all together. They were very little things, some E things and some S things and some governance things. And companies kind of did it a bit, and about once a year they would take out of the cupboard this little bundle of things, and then go and solemnly and talk to the social responsibility investors, the SRI community. And then they kind of go, done that, pop it back in the cupboard, And now this stuff is center stage and going up the corporate agenda like whoosh. So they've taken it out the cupboard, they put it on the table, and they've opened up the package and they've gone, oh, Lord, that's not going to do it. And of course you can't bundle E and S. And of course you can't bundle E and S and G. And of course you can't come up with a single number that does it. And of course the data doesn't work today. We know that, like we didn't have financial reporting once.
Yeah.
And it's literally only in the last few years that we've looked at it. And one of the classic questions is, but we don't have the data. In the world I live in, you can separate people almost instantly. Some people go, well, of course we can't do this. It doesn't work. I mean, the data's rubbish. And anyway, you can't bundle these things. And other people go, I know, it's really... I wonder if we could get the data from... What would it do to get the data better? And by the way, business leaders are constantly making decisions on imperfect data. So you can literally see some business leaders lean in. I mean, methane, let's get the eyes in the sky and get the satellites to track the methane. If that's going to give us continuous monitoring, let's do continuous monitoring. Other people go, well, the data's not good on methane. You've got to start somewhere. Who's starting? Who's doing it? So I think that you wind the clock forward. We won't need what we call ESG today, but we will need tracking of performance against these big societal questions. So, of course, something like gender pay gap is totally inadequate today. But it's made people look at gender pay. And people start to go, well, that doesn't work. And of course it will. Of course, well, it matters whether they're doing part-time jobs or less senior, all of that. But you don't even ask the question till you've got the data. When Quincy went plastics into Coca-Cola, and they're the worst plastic polluter in the world, he said, well, we've got to have every market tell us what the plastic waste is in that market. Nobody had ever looked.
Yeah.
No operational head had looked.
How did we work it out?
And now they have the data.
Right.
And of course the data's imperfect, but they didn't have it before. And so it starts to work. And then we're literally going to have visual of deforestation down to the tree.
I guess we're all getting more educated. And I guess even though, and that's an interesting point, even though I think, I got to be honest, I think almost all the press is sort of worthless now. It's just sort of it's just selling newspapers. I mean, I'm almost going to give up my FT subscription even, because I only get the FT because it's like, well, just give me some facts and what's going on. But not to completely knock all that industry. I'm really sorry, but I should be also happy that YouTube exists, the podcast exists. And it's like the silent majority. It's like people are educating the crap out of each other and people, sure, people are in their bubbles and blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of us are trying not to be in our bubble. A lot of us are really trying to understand the subject and look around.
Explain.
And, please explain. I don't want to be again, back to the silent majority. I think the silent majority, aren't judgmental, don't want to have a chip on their shoulder. The people with anger are kind of at the fringes shouting, and maybe, I don't know. There's sort of, a bit like how we would rate a burger on how well it tastes, and we would have thought that McDonald's is the best burger in the world when we were, in the 80s. And now it's like, no, that's not a good burger. This is a good burger. It's a bit like that with companies. It's like their problems are complex. Looking at a ESG report or everything, we'll become more sophisticated in how we judge what they're doing.
And they're getting more sophisticated
really,
all the time.
Methane for that company.
Yeah.
And this is what they're doing to deal with it.
And really this is about soil health, or really this is about deforestation. And we'll have the data for it. And investors will get the data directly on the issues that matter to that company.
We'll be able to look it up ourselves on Google Maps half the time, isn't it?
Exactly.
It gets updated.
So I think the underlying question is, do we need companies to be clear what they're doing? Do we need them to put it into the way they run the company? It's going to have data. ESG is a kind of primitive first sketch that came away from history. And now it's center stage. Now it's top of the corporate priority list. And so we need it. So what shape will it take is an open question, but it's going to be to do with data, and it's going to be created by the people who are trying to help create it, as opposed to folding their arms and going, well, this is all nonsense.
What do you think of B Corps?
I think B Corps are another version of an early version of surely we can do this better. Yeah. And I think that they look less fleet-footed than the world needs right now, today. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was a vocabulary that was very much about making money and doing good. And I think we're past that. I don't think it's about...
I think you're illustrating it now. I think a business has to work out how, to run it. And if you go to any business, and I deal with lots, they all have different KPI, different things that matter to them, and you can't just sort of try and summarize any business. They've got to think deeply about it and deeply about what resource they have. I mean, there's an interesting question because your book is The Activist Leader. Mm. I mean, and I love everything you've said. So, just slightly changing tack, but, brilliant thoughts. Why frame business leadership in terms of activism, especially when leaders would reject that instinctively, I assume?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They really do. They mostly go, oh, my God, NGOs at the door.
It's another one of these bloody activists at the table.
At the door. And they're
Tony, get rid of them.
Yeah, and they're painting the doors red and that kind of thing. Bloody activists. And quite often... I remember a call about 18 months ago, a particular company, and they were being really, really challenged by activists. And I was, these days, so many meetings are on Teams or Zoom, and they were in another country, and we had 2 or 3 of us on the team in other countries. They were being attacked by an activist. And we said, well, how can we help? What's the question? Well, they're saying we're very, very bad at this thing. We're very, very bad. Number one, they're saying we're number one bad. And we said, well, what's the actual situation? What's happening? Well, we're not number one. And we went, well, so what are you? What's happening? Well, we're number 3 by our number. And I said, if we're going to help you, I think you better have higher aspirations than proving you're number 3. It's not a good place to be, is it really? And so, but their question was, well, should we sue them? And all of the team, we kind of leant into the screen. No, it's not a good look. You're a very big company, and this is an NGO trying to point out that you're not doing everything you could be doing on this subject, right? So let's talk about what you could be doing.
I think you illustrated that very well, that ultimately you're dealing with humans, and humans are very defensive.
Yeah.
I mean, they're
saying we're bad. We're not as bad as that.
Anyone come along and starts criticizing my job, I can't help myself.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, they've got a place in the world, because if you say to them, well, why are you doing this? Sometimes they go, well, the NGOs will attack us if we don't. And you go, great. So thumbs up. Well, if the regulation means we have to. Great, get on with the regulation. So the pressures on them are real, and thumbs up, because they don't tend to do it all on their own without the pressure.
And probably they wouldn't have a meeting with the NGO. I mean, the NGO didn't need to dump it in the press, but the NGO could have come to see them and say, look, we were just doing this thing and you're really crap at this.
So the point is, they realize. Now, why do we say, well, you need to be activist? Is that actually to do this in a company is to override the way companies have been run for a very long time. And ever since we've had a Friedman kind of proposition of the business is business, and the only thing that matters is profit, the idea that you would seriously put this into the heart of how you run the company is to change how companies are run. And you'd better have the conviction, and you'd better be prepared to override the norm to do it. And actually, when people do it, it takes a spirit and a picture of where you're trying to get to that is the activist spirit. And if you look at the pure thing, what is an activist? To me, is somebody who looks at a very, very complicated situation, sees the very complicated situation in all its starkness, and where most people go, well, somebody better do something about that. They go, I think I could do something about that.
Oh wow!
And every activist you've ever come across, that's what's happened. Now, not everybody is activist about everything, but as you said earlier, it's about the thing that speaks, that hits you. And it's kind of, I think I'm something to that. And you're not the whole answer, but you can mobilize resources of all kinds, including other people's support for it, to change things. Business leaders are brilliantly placed to do that. And in fact, that's what they know how to do, mobilize resources towards an end.
You're almost telling them, become your own activist.
That's what we're saying, become your own activist.
Yeah.
Why are they taking the agenda from you? You can see it needs to happen. Why aren't you taking the agenda? And everybody I've had the privilege of working with, or have seen who've done stunning work who I wish I was working with, that's what they're doing. And they're doing it out of conviction that in this complicated scenario, things do need to change, and they're a bit of what's going to make it change, and they know how to mobilize resources towards it. And business needs that kind of leaders, and society needs that kind of business leader. And when they get the hang of it, and they get that, and they get, it's addictive, and it becomes it becomes part of their
addicted activist.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. You know what's interesting too is Daniel Priestley, who we had on just recently, he was making this point about people used to go to a company to buy a product that had people behind it. Now they see a person, a CEO, an Elon Musk or whatever, and then they look at a product, and then they buy something. It's like it's all backwards. And businesses these days all need to have leaders who are they're more important than the brand. So this fits in with that, is in how do I become a leader that's not just name the CEO of BP, name the CEO of Rolls-Royce. I don't imagine anyone could do it. I mean, I couldn't tell you any of them, but
and
I'm
also
terrible with
you
names.
could bring it home too, which is be the leader you want to be.
Yeah. Try and be the human you want to be.
Try and be the human you want to be.
It's like going to the gym, isn't it? Being a good husband or whatever.
And it's interesting because I was lucky enough before I was doing this work, and before I was coached to a lot of people as they took on senior roles. And it's very exciting, any senior role you get, whatever kind of senior role. It isn't just the CEO. You want to go for it, And you want to do it to your best. And you don't want to be reduced to everybody being angry with you for the profit margin. That's boring. It's rubbish. But actually, people do have an aspiration of who they want to be when they get an exciting job like this. And it truthfully is, what kind of a leader do you want to be? And if we are all, as we know, in a multi-crisis world, really polycrisis or whatever the fancy language for it is these days, if you run a big business in any one of the major roles, capacities in the business, you know your business is actually integral to that issue. It's both part of the problem and part of the solution. So you're going to take it off the radar screen? What kind of a leader takes it off the radar screen today? So it's about what kind of a leader did you think you were going to be with your hands on the reins at this time? You're going to walk out the other end not having thought about this? When there are patterns of how to actually do it? Of course you should do it. And when they get the hang of it, they go, it's better. So it's hard.
No, I think you put that beautifully there. And I think that's a great place to pause. I just, I think good on you, like trying to, work with these companies. And I guess this is sort of part of what the Brunswick Group's doing generally, is it? And you co-authored this with who? Was it
John Miller? He and I started this work in Brunswick together. And it was, it was funny because I don't know that we knew the adventure we were on, but it's very, it's never a boring day, and it's hugely exciting.
Very inspiring, and it is exciting,
I find it exciting. I literally find it exciting day by day because it is an unfolding story, and you feel you've got your hands on the reins of something that needs answering, and always you're just going, well, did this help? You know you can't do the whole thing, but as I said earlier, most people do feel very helpless in the face of these things. And so to be able to be positively engaged in helping mobilize solutions, just being part of the mix of people mobilizing solutions to some of these big questions, it's genuinely interesting. I feel super lucky because I get every morning questions where I go, I don't know if I don't know an answer to that. But that's an interesting place to be.
Do you think the academics of the world, you can engage with them as well? And sort of bring them into, because we need their minds, surely, to solve these problems.
We need all of it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Back to the NGO question, I think it's another reason why to me, the question isn't is business big? We need all of it. We need absolutely all of it. And so a lot of our lives are, how do you bring the academics in to make the case on that? Or can they analyze something for you? You need the NGOs because they're pointing at the problems and they'll pour their passion into the question. We need the policymakers because they do need to create the incentives and the level playing field. You need the little businesses because they feed into the storyline of the big. We need it all. And people have different parts of the solution. And I was lucky enough in my early career to do a lot of theatre direction, and it really does show you that the whole thing works when the whole cast is working. And at the forefront these days, the businesses that are absolutely doing the leading edge work are driving for systemic change. And systemic change means being able to work with all the different parts of the issue and play your part, but help others contribute into the whole.
This sort of and is that maybe it's sort of my final. Is that where does this come from in you? Because you've had quite a sort of quite business minded in a way, but you've had a career more in media, I guess. Is it? Well, what can you class your career in any industry or not really?
I don't really know. I think I was a documentary maker to begin with and a theatre director, and one of the great things you get to do in either of in the work I did in theatre anyway, but certainly in documentary making, you're always looking at very big, complicated issues and trying to make sense of them in a way that is communicative power of it. And the way you are doing that is you're stitching. You have to learn to stitch together the plot line and then make it credible.
Also, with documentary, it's storytelling, isn't it?
It's storytelling.
A struggle, but we need I can imagine with the big companies, it's a bit like, here's the struggle, here's the obstacles.
Do you know, you've absolutely hit on it, because it's such a powerful point, because when earlier I was saying the thing that what differentiates the leaders is they'll pivot towards the problem. What you've just said is absolutely the essence of that thought, because if you took, corporate speak, which is pretty grim at its worst, and there's a lot of it, it's just ghastly. No, it's all nothing to see here. It's all fine. It's all under control. And by the way, we're very good. We've got great values and it's all good. The leaders in this kind of work, they literally turn towards the problem and they go, you're right, that's a problem. And so what we mean by you need to learn out loud is you need to point at the jeopardy. There is no plot without a jeopardy.
No.
And so what is dangerous here? I remember saying to a client very early on, you don't have a St. George without the dragon. So if you want to be St. George, you better identify the dragon.
That's a great point.
You're looking for the jeopardy.
You actually, a lot of things are forged. You can have a friendship that's superficial and then you really have some crap together. And
if you can
kills you or makes you stronger.
And so actually when business leaders go, conflict minerals, or, oh, wow, there's the enemy. How do I earn my heroism? By going, you're right, that is a really difficult challenge, and it's not okay for the world, and it's not okay for us. Yeah, truly. But if you know stories, you know that it's the jeopardy at the heart of the story. And literally a lot of my working days today are going, it's all right that it's dangerous. It's all right that you don't have an answer. If you can show people the journey, they'll make you a hero. But you have to share why it's dangerous. You have to share why it's difficult. And we have to worry for you when it's hard. So all I mean is, if you can get into the groove of going, this is hard, this is what we're trying to achieve, show us that you're really, prove to me that you're earnest about it.
Don't try and show progress if you haven't made any progress.
Yeah. And explain you've been trying, explain it's a problem, because we've all got the problem. But this is a mindset that isn't the way leaders are taught. And it is much more naked. So you've got to be careful.
Lucy, it has been an absolute pleasure. I feel your name, Lucy Parker. You should be a detective or something, it sounds like, but you've been brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, if people want to learn more, find out more, where do they go?
Well, I guess we wrote Activist Leader because it was the how of this. It is go check out the book.
You'd recommend it, anyone, I guess, to read it?
Well, I would actually. I mean, we wrote it for people interested in business and for people who work in business, but people interested in these subjects, which at some level is everybody. But I think for me, the critical thing about that is people are seeing why, they're even seeing what we were trying to write about is how. And so if you're saying, well, if you wanted to follow up, then I would follow up with the how. And that's what we were trying to write about. The patterns of how are actually getting very clear.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sim, in Dee's chair today. Thank you, Romeo, lying on the ground somewhere. It's been a real pleasure, and I've learned a lot. And that has been this week's episode of Business Without Bullshit. And we'll be back next Wednesday. And until then, it's ciao.